Good morning. My name is Daniel Douglas with D3 Technologies, and today I'm going to give this webinar on Fusion 360 updates for 2017. Now, the nature of this webinar is going to have a lot of overview. There's just a lot that happened over the year, so I'm going to do some demonstrations towards the end within Fusion and do a little bit of interaction with the UI. I would like everybody to kind of think about the changes that affect them the most, and feel free to interact in the chat and ask any questions or give any tidbits that, things that were particularly helpful to you, things that you found to be really vital to your user experience. So moving forward, I am, like I said, Daniel Douglas. I'm an implementation consultant here at D3 Technologies. I'm a Fusion 360 specialist, so I do instruction and support. And today, we're going to do this overview. Fusion 360 has had a very dynamic and conscientious development team. So over 2017, we've seen some real changes, real adaptation happening. I'm going to try to give a summary of the 14 updates. Some of them are going to be a little bit more in depth than others, but I'm going to try to move through those pretty quickly. And then I'm going to take a real focus on the December update. And we'll hash that out a little bit, and I'll do a little bit of demonstrating. Any feedback in the chat or any questions will help me provide the best information for you. And then we're going to kind of look at what's expected for the next year. We're going to definitely dwell on the change that has occurred and kind of get an understanding of how Autodesk has been doing Fusion, how they've been changing it and fixing it, and kind of what to expect based on where we're at now, where we've been. So, all right, I'm going to start out January, first update of the year. Okay, this is a really important update, and it had a lot of new features throughout the year. Some updates have more features than others. But it also focused on actually a few bugs. So it introduced offline mode with local caching. This is a big step for a lot of people. The ability to work without an internet connection, to be able to save files, to be able to work within your file structure. That was not previously available, or it was available in very limited and non-functional ways. They introduced a branch and merge preview, which disappeared in July. This is something to be aware of. A lot of people have forgotten about it, but it basically allowed you to have multiple timelines, allowed you to go into a sandbox mode and try out different designs and see what they looked like without altering or damaging your original timeline, which is very important in parametric modeling. Particularly when you're working with assemblies, it can get pretty messy. So they discontinued that in July and chose not to make it into a product yet because it just wasn't able to get up to par. But they're still working on it. So letting you know about that we had a glimpse and then it disappeared. It happens a lot. Okay, big emphasis throughout this whole presentation here. So many Idea Station posts have shaped and changed Fusion. So I'm going to focus on some of the problems and then some of the key additions. So for January, they added new hotkeys, a lot of new hotkeys. Center of mass was added to inspection. Added a search feature in the materials library, which seems intuitive that you'd already have one, but that's the nature of Fusion. Is they'll provide a tool almost before it's ready, kind of like clay, and then the users will mold how it ends up appearing and acting, which is something that's a pretty big deal, especially for any of you who are using it on a regular basis. The ability to spot problems and answer to Autodesk and actually make them answer to you about why things aren't working. Directly built into Fusion. I am going to go more on that. Okay, adding parametric capabilities to the move command. That was a big deal that allowed for more direct modeling. CAM and cloud libraries were CAM cloud libraries were enabled, and a lot of the CAM commands were refined, and they did a major update to the HSM kernel. All right, so as we move into February, we just have a lot of maintenance. There were a lot of issues that were recurring, especially in the first half of the year, where people, particularly on Mac, but also on Windows machines, were having weird anomalous crashes where you'd find yourself in sort of a back corner of the software, and you kind of just fall through and it'd crash. So things like empty data panels, and the 3D viewer wasn't working, and you would have a sketch crash if you tried to dimension or tried to add a constraint in the wrong order. And so they made those changes. I focus on some of the problems because I want to really hit on the change that occurs. Okay, once again, February 13th, you have primarily a maintenance update. They added a lot of CAM samples. So a lot of you, when you're working out of your personal hub, you'll see those samples in the data panel. Those weren't always there, and they've been added as they're available. Now, they fixed some really big bugs. They resolved sign-in issues, and then there was an update limbo. So basically, people were trying to sign in, and it would permanently, I say permanently in quotes because they fixed it, it would lock them out of Fusion, and then it would basically prohibit them, even if they logged in a different user, from getting their updates. Among other things, there were crashes caused by empty drawing files. There was a parameter interrupt, you get an overlay. There were a lot of additions and changes to tools, so refining here and there. They really healed the CAM library, which was kind of in a state of disarray after that HSM update. But onward. March 1st, they included some key new features and several bug fixes. They solved a move group. So if you had an empty group and you tried to move it, it would crash Fusion. And there was an issue with using trim on a constrained line. That trim wouldn't work. Let's see. I'm not just bashing on Fusion here, but I think it's important to acknowledge the flaws in the software and see how rapidly the change came. And all of these problems were spotted and documented and voted on by users within the idea station. Big move here in March, they added that multi-sheet drawing capability. Previously, you could only have one sheet at a time. They allowed multiple sheets. They allowed you to hide and change visibility and suppress or unsuppress objects within those drawings on each sheet, which is great because you may not exactly want the same, your entire assembly per sheet. So that's great. A lot of things you'd expect, but once again, this is Fusion is clay that is constantly being shaped. They added ordinate dimensions. For those who are unfamiliar with that, that's essentially having an origin and then measuring all the features, dimensioning out all your features on your part or model based on that origin. So they allowed for grouping bodies. This is a feature that I will probably demonstrate for you towards the end. Really handy for organizing. So it's not really a folder, but you can treat a collection of bodies like they belong to each other, like they almost like a component, but you can still open it up and edit them separately. And it's great for moving and for progressing, especially when you're going from multi-body to an actual assembly, or within Fusion, what we call an assembly, where you turn things into components, turn bodies into components, and start using joints and rigid groups and whatnot. All right, they enabled a change in texture direction. This is a big deal for a lot of people, honestly. The ability to tweak that is one of what they call the underrated changes of the year. That little ability, let's say you have a pattern of a wood grain or even just brushed steel, you can really alter the appearance by scaling it or changing direction. And I found that to be great as I've been doing renderings. There was an issue with look at, the look at command, which allows you to basically rectify your view normal to a surface so that you can sketch on it or make changes directly. And there were some craziness happening there. Let's see, spine handles and snapping. There was a really exciting case where spine handles, if you move them incorrectly, could crash Fusion, and then they would snap and remain snapped and constrained. And then they added clear messages for failed simulation studies. Okay. All right, 29th, once again, maintenance. Almost a lot of these updates are there to fix previous updates. And there can be some bitterness in software development for the user when they have a piece of software that's changing. But the thing about Fusion is just the sheer amount of capability that's added. So among the fixed bugs, you had sketch dimensioning was dysfunctional in a couple of cases, and you could even get crashing out of it. You had UI lingering, so you'd switch from one environment to another, and you'd have a menu that was floating there, and you couldn't exit it or anything. There were some serious problems with PDF output, and they really refined the workflow and commands across all environments. So a lot of these I can't really get into a lot of detail unless you ask me about them. So once again, reach out on that chat. And let me see. Let me demonstrate very quickly. I'm going to type in the chat. You can select whether you're sending it to me, to everybody. If you have any questions or thoughts throughout this, please post them there. If it's, if you want me to address something, you can send it directly to me, or if you just want to, talk about something that throw it out there in the chat. Perfect. Okay. They officially released the shape generator studies, and that's under the ultimate package of Fusion. But kind of like a micro version of generative design, just directly inside of Fusion. And I have used that a lot, and you can get some really interesting, very unique designs that you wouldn't get if you were just thinking about it. The computer does the math, and you can optimize for strength, for rigidity, and so on. And then they officially released the 2D cutting tools within the CAM environment. So basically support for water jet, laser cutting, and plasma cutting, which is amazing. Just across the board adding tools. And allowed for the creation of custom palettes. So for those of you who are interested in the development side, customizing your software to match your company's exact needs, there is an API for Fusion, so be aware of that. And that was what the custom palettes are a part of. So the browser and let's say the sketch constraints, those are palettes. Okay, onward. In April, you had job and service status management. So if you were doing any cloud-based activity, running simulations, renderings, etc., you can now manage those. And that happened at that time. And then it gave you notifications and improved existing notifications. It also gave you that online-offline switch, which is really handy. It made drawings accessible in design details. Let's see. Added 3D coincident constraints. So 3D sketching in Fusion is something that you have to turn on in preferences, and I will go over that towards the end here. But within preferences, you can turn on and off previews. You can make adjustments to default information for importing and exporting and so on. They added the sheet metal preview. So they officially released it in April. And that was exciting for a lot of people. It was fairly limited in the beginning, but right on release, they added the miter, miter flanges, so allowed you to better define your miter gap, and added some automated tools that previously, if anybody had been using the preview before the actual release, it was not in there. And they also allowed you to create flanges with contour flanges with sketches that directly connected to the to your model. So that was part of the 3D sketches, the enabling you to interact in that fashion, and that was part of that update. They also improved the rules UI, so setting your sheet metal rules, making adjustments on the fly, and they also increased or implemented access to your rule settings inside the flange command. So good stuff. And they added the section analysis tool. Fantastic tool. I use that all the time. If I'm doing any kind of assembly, I just really like to be able to get as many perspectives as possible on my design. I kind of condensed these updates. A lot of vital updates that were about refining the tools that we already had. They added name views to the web viewer. You had a couple of name view features going in and out there. We now have them, which is awesome, both in CAM, in the model environment, and within the online browser. And they officially added the fully constrained analysis within the simulation environment, which is great. Let's see, they removed the branch and merge, and I mentioned that earlier. So that is something I would look into. For any of this information, actual details, you can find them on the Fusion 360 blog on Autodesk on their main website. So you could just Google Fusion 360 updates, and your first link will be the What's New archive, or at least it was for me. I can also demonstrate that location. All right, they added, they resolved some issues regarding joints and sheet metal. So there were quite a few issues with assemblies, and like I mentioned before, just the process of going from body to component really messed with a lot of people in the beginning, specifically those who are used to external referencing of parts into assemblies inside of Inventor, for example. The ability to do the top-down design where you create components within the single and basically create an assembly as you go along is something that Fusion has focused on, and they've really been getting better. But there have been a lot of issues in this particular event around sheet metal and joint. Basically, any of your assembly commands, there were definitely some hierarchy issues. So they added interior rails and points for patch surfaces. I don't know if any of you operate in the patch environment. It can really be crazy unless you have some pretty good training on it. My early days in the patch environment got, let's say, explosive. You delete one thing and you don't know that you just opened up, like for example, a 5-star patch, and a 5-star patch that was generated in that particular spot. It was actually, a couple of triangles, basically a triangle and a square, and you deleted those, and then you try to put in the 5-star patch, and you get your order of operations wrong, stuff like that. Enabled support of simulation model as a new Fusion design. This one is actually pretty awesome. So you can export a sim model directly. This is something that they focused on towards the second half of the year, which is basically exporting PDFs, the ability to print, the ability to export DXFs, which we will get to. All right, October was almost entirely about little tiny problems. There were a very, very large number. It would have basically taken me 4 or 5 slides if I listed them out. So I chose instead to focus on that form mill tool. That's pretty, well, I'm not going to focus on it at this time, but that was a pretty exciting tool for a lot of CAM users. One of what was considered a limitation, the lack of that tool really opened up capabilities once that was released. So excellent job to Autodesk. And I believe that was actually an Idea Station post that kind of pushed that one off at the beginning. Officially anyways, they linked it to it. All right, on December 11th, they had a big update for Fusion usability. This, for me, changed the way I talk about Fusion, and we'll continue on that. But we fixed a lot of, Autodesk fixed a lot of problems with the UI. A lot of commands and menus were sort of revisualized, rearranged. There were a couple of CAM toolpaths and previews that were causing problems, and you had some very specific workflows to get them to work correctly, and they fixed those up. There were some pretty big issues with the appearance library crashing, and basically you'd save your own library and you'd be unable to access those. Let's see, the public share link, which is an amazing tool within Fusion, allowing you to essentially link someone to a 3D viewer. They can check it out, they can perform sectional analysis on it, measure it, and then they can export it if you enable it, export it as a file of their choice. Really a fantastic feature of Fusion, really sets it apart. They refined that and fixed some of the persistent problems. They also had some issues with the toolbar, like people were deleting their icons, trying to customize their toolbar, and it was basically creating some interface issues, and they removed those that freedom of movement, but it really solved some of the issues that were occurring for new users. And then they adjusted some of the file management, so the structure, Fusion Team or A360. They made quite a few changes actually, in terms of prioritization, just making it a lot better for teams to work on the information or work on the files. And they also added some increased support for a variety of files. For example, uploading Excel documents or Word documents and so on. All right, within December, you had they added a guide surface for a sweep tool. So this was a big issue if you were trying to manually create threading for advanced or for very specific cases, for example, bottles or jars. And they also added or refined the ability to export DXFs, and they officially released that ability. So that's one thing that was a really important feature for those with older CAM equipment where they needed profiles. So, wire cutters and older water jets and so on. Okay, they added flange collision detection. Once again, sort of a NODA feature, but that was also an Idea Station post, something that they had down the road anyways. but just another example of their process, their cycle for providing a tool, seeing what needs to change, and having users tell them. All right. One big feature for me was the X quick key for construction lines. This construction lines are something that I was kind of raised on in AutoCAD, and I needed those. And so when I moved into Fusion, I kind of had to move away from that. So suddenly being able to have really intricate sketches or guide sketches using those construction lines, it suddenly made some of my previous workflows a lot more accessible. All right, they allowed for exploded views and animation. So they already had exploded views, but previously, if you wanted an exploded view, all the parts would just linearly move apart. And for some assemblies, you have to reach up and inside, and you want the paths. You don't want the paths to intersect when you're doing a demonstration, creating a video that a lot of people are going to see. So it gave handles to that view, so you could adjust the lines, I guess the guide rails as they call them, to move your parts inside of that animation environment. They made it a lot easier to get cloud credits, so this was a big issue I had a lot of people asking me about. And so now they have an interface directly inside of Fusion for purchasing those. And then printing drawings. Once again, one of those features that you would have expected, but this is a constant change and growth, and it's exciting to see those tools. You have a suggestion, you're like, I wish that was there, and then a week later, there it is. I love it. So improved interference detection and simulation. See, they officially released nonlinear static stress reports. So graphs. That's what people want to see. They want to know, for demonstrations, for white papers, whatever it is, you need that data. And so people were previously having to export the data or acquire it in another way, and there you can generate a report. So fantastic. Flow toolpath now available. Now, I'm not a CAM specialist, but the flow toolpath, based on the toolpaths that I've set up, that really opened up some of my 3D capabilities. Something that was almost like previously a limitation for multi-axis in Fusion really opened up those multi-axis users, and just another tool to put it on par with some of the more dedicated software. Once again, having all of your tools in the same environment is the most exciting thing about Fusion. So I'm perfectly willing to deal with the cycle to eventually have this single environment that is made by users and generated by people who know what they need. Well, here we go. So as we continue here, let's see. There was a lot of little things. So throughout the year, a lot of increased support for Haas machines, support for Sandvik turning machines. Let's see, access to. So this is part of the API. They gave access to internal modeling engine to create geometry, which is amazing for people who are using the API. But basically, you can create your own commands down at the basic level for generating new shapes and new solids, which is amazing for people who really know what they need and are relying on the old school library method. So excellent. Let's see, and better performance for browser-based Fusion. Really, a really awesome tool there. Allows you to use like a Chromebook. All right, so I went a little slow on that overview, unfortunately, but I have some more time here. I'm going to talk a little bit about AnyCAD, and then we'll kind of just take a look at some of the big things that happened over the year. And I haven't had any questions in chat, so then I'll just actually close it out from there, unless I get any feedback or questions and whatnot. So let's see. All right, so the desktop connector is what you use to enable AnyCAD. Essentially, you're reserving a file location on your desktop that is directly synced to A360. So you have a physical hard location and a quote-unquote soft location on the cloud that are linked. What you put into one will appear in the other if you have an internet connection. And it is very secure. It's isolated, kind of like a little, I don't know, it's like a quarantined area of your hard drive that it allows to do that. So very specific process for accessing it. This is pretty important for some people with like ITAR. I mean, this doesn't fix ITAR compliance, but it helps for people who have a need for an online and offline environment. Definitely a great asset there. All right, it requires a team hub. You have to have a team hub, not just your personal hub. It allows an Inventor or SolidWorks part to be directly referenced in Fusion with, so you're referencing that part into, it's linked into your assembly, and you can make changes and start a timeline that acts on that part. But if the original part is changed and updated, that change reflects directly into your Fusion drawing, that is amazing. Honestly, something once again that you'd think almost would be intuitive, but when you're talking about different companies with different approaches to geometry and model generation, really great. Especially with companies that will have a lot of files coming in and a lot of different systems that require different files. Fusion kind of acts like a little bit of a translator. This is just another tool making Fusion into sort of a very useful and pivotal part of your design suite, whatever you're using. It's a great asset. And then AnyCAD, basically, Fusion model changes when the non-native file is changed, which is great. You have to do a refresh feature. Desktop connector, you can access that. Physical location and then an online location. And then this is just an image how to switch your team hub. So going from your personal, which is for me, there's my name, Daniel Douglas, and I can switch back between different hubs. If you have questions about setting up a hub or what that even looks like, feel free to call us here at D3, and we'd love to talk to you about it. As far as file referencing goes, just mentioning, so the Inventor file, for example, would be referenced, and it is not being edited, it is being referenced. So it is preserved. The changes are happening inside of Fusion. Kind of a potato thing, but all right. So for the entire year, software has had, it has many hurdles, this particular Fusion 360. And honestly, from the day I first started, 2.5 years ago, I have seen so many almost, show-stopping problems that I was like, okay, I don't want to deal with this. And then I come back a week later and boom, problem is solved. And throughout this year, the number of crashes, so when I first started, I'd have crashes, probably every other time I tried a new tool or whatever it was. Now I will go months without a crash, and usually when it happens, it's my fault. My system was overtaxed, or I tried to do something, and so that has been an amazing journey to see those changes and that sort of perfection that happens slowly, time after time, idea station post after idea station post. So the dev team is amazing. They listen, they're very approachable, and they understand that they're making something for you, for the user. And they're relying heavily on user feedback. So we've seen a real transformation to Fusion. Just adding sheet metal just a single environment brought it closer to the mark of those workhorse parametric softwares like SolidWorks and Inventor. Okay, I'm going to switch over to my Fusion, and I'm going to just demonstrate how to get to a couple of the things that we've talked about. Once again, now is the time in this last 5 or so minutes to send me any questions on chat, and you know, give me some thoughts. I'd love to hear what you've thought about this year so far, and as far as Fusion goes, be really interested in hearing that actually. Let's see. Okay. Now, one thing about Fusion is over here you have your user profile, drop-down menu. I'm going to click on Preferences. The way Autodesk works, at least the way they work so far, as far as this development cycle goes, they will have an idea or a concept, and they will create a preview for that and release it to a limited selection of individuals, beta testers, or I suppose alpha testers first, and then they move into a beta stage where they allow a limited preview release where anybody who wants to can look at it, although not all previews are available to all users. It depends on your status. So I'm going down to here. Here we go. So the branch and merge preview, which is officially, it's still available to me, but it is closing. They were officially closing it in April, and then they begin the process of removing it almost across the board in July. So let's see. PCB feature allows for interface with Eagle, something that I'm learning about. It's pretty fun, pretty interesting. Really adds to the product development toolkit here. Allowing advanced study types. Okay, live review, collaboration support. Okay, mesh workspace. I click on that and I have a new workspace. Like, for example, I'll just apply over here, model. And I do believe I need a mesh first. I'm not going to go down that path right now. But yes, if you have a mesh and it is in front of you, you can switch to the mesh workspace. It's going to be like right after or before patch. Okay, I'm going to go over here to help. Under help, you have a couple of options learning more about Fusion 360, just sometimes some helpful videos for tips and tricks. And then community forum, which is a great place to raise a racket if there's a change you want to see. Gallery if you have inspiration for design. Product roadmap, submit an idea. So I'm going to open up that product roadmap. Right. So this is the blog. Let's see, let's go down to, actually, let's go to the 2018. So this autodesk.com/products/fusion360/blog. This is a great place to get news directly from the source, from the development team. You can get really into the weeds with this, but it's pretty great tool. I reference it frequently. Okay, so here, these are some of the things that they've already done that they're just summarizing. Be sure to check that out. Let me see. I have a little bit of information that I want to go over here. First, let's open up that idea station. Submit an idea. from here, you can define the problem and then write a description, post it. And posting it allows people to vote on it. And the higher the vote count, the more likely it is to be addressed. So like here, locally store all files. This would be in addition to locally caching. So local caching is possible, and you can cache everything if you go through manually, but it looks like we have a desire to do a default. That is a great, just a great sort of specific area of the forum where you can go say, hey, this is a good idea, and hand it off. So right here, it's accepted. Let's click on that. Now, let's see. To kind of close out, let's just do a little year review here. So Autodesk released this infographic. It's kind of cool. It's pretty fun. Has a lot of details and information in it. So here, let's see, 31 product updates delivered just across the board, right? So I accounted for the major updates. There are a lot of little updates in there. Development tasks, 2,914 development tasks, amazing. And then 419 improvements made during December alone. It's excellent. And just some cool information. They had a lot of users showing up on the map here in Canada, the UK, Japan, Germany, India. The US is probably the primary base right now, but that's just some growth that happened. Okay, so this is fun. Almost everybody spends the majority of their time sketching, and so you could probably split the rest of these. Personally, rendering and modeling, and sketching are where I spend most of my time. Sculpting is really a crazy set of tools, really powerful, and haven't a lot of call to use those recently. Let's see. These are the cool ones: parametric move and align tools, loft rails, sheet metal, and then sweep has a guide surface. Those three I mentioned. I was pretty excited about those. Really giving options that helped us move forward. It just goes through the sketching milestones. It goes through some of the tools, like the slicer for Fusion 360. This is a very awesome tool, particularly if you wanted to do something like create a printed or cardboard cutout stacked together. And you cut out all the cross sectionals and then glue them together, and then you have a 3D object, whatever material. A lot of CAM milestones. Now, one thing that I would mention here is that, there we go, the beginning of 2018 is going to be a little slow update-wise, and you're going to see them focusing on getting their processes for development a little bit more refined. So they're planning on hitting the second quarter and third quarter pretty hard with some big changes. But for the moment, we're just gonna hold off for a minute and kind of work on what we have, and we should see a couple of small updates, but expect a lull in this update storm. So, all right, well, this webinar went a little bit longer than planned. Once again, I really appreciate any and all feedback or comments. The more I know, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I know. Get that backwards. So if you have any questions for us about training or about using Fusion or Fusion team, or starting a Fusion hub, or have any just any questions in general about manufacturing software tools here from Autodesk, feel free to contact us here at D3. I'd love to have a conversation with any of you who have any insights about how you were affected by these updates. Here's our company phone number, the 877-731-7171. My personal extension is 137. I'm going to put that in the chat. So I would love to have a conversation. So I hope that all of you have a wonderful day, and I appreciate you logging into this webinar. And happy Fusion, and have a wonderful year. All right. Bye-bye.